Tēnā rā koutou katoa, ko Tara toku ingoa, ke te kai whakahaere ha kena hapa spora hau I mahi ana. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening, giving up your precious time that you have after work hours for some. First and foremost, I just want to thank our partners, CLM, Sport Waitakere, Sport Auckland, Active, for supporting us on this webinar and sharing out within your communities. As discussed or as explained in the handouts and the emails, obviously a very important time coming up in terms of council annual budget. So thank you for joining us this evening to learn more and hear about how you guys can make your submissions. First and foremost, let's get us started with karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia makina ke uta, kia mātaratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, te hei mauri ora. Awesome. So usual housekeeping tonight, team. So please note this will be recorded. We've had multiple requests from people that can't be on here tonight, so we'll be looking to get that out afterwards. Please make sure that your microphone is on mute. Please turn your video off, and we will have the opportunity for questions throughout the webinar. So just please use the chat function for that, and we'll get Emily to read them out when the time is appropriate. Cool. So our agenda tonight, we have Simon Tattersfield from Active, Space and Places Manager, who will talk through what the annual budget is, why it's important to submit this year, and the implications for the sector. We'll then hear from Richard Kasut, General Manager at Harbour Sport, who will talk through submission examples. I'll then go through how to submit, a bit of a guided tour through Google, and then at the end we will show you or lead you towards your local support or your support from your local RSTs that could help you with your submissions. Cool. I'll pass on to you, Simon.
Kia ora. Thanks, Ty. Call Simon Tattersfield, Toku Ingoa. I'm the Spaces and Places Manager at Active. Thank you to Ty, Emily, Mike and Richard for organising this. Really well done. It's really important that we get the message out around this annual budget. And thank you for inviting me to speak. Emily, next slide, please. So thank you. So to the annual budget, sometimes annual plan, annual budget, they are actually the same document. Terms tend to be used interchangeably. We'll try to stick with the term annual budget because it tends to make more sense to people. This is the third year of a 10-year budget, so we will have a new long-term plan next year. Given the current financial dynamic, I think that's potentially a little bit concerning, but at the moment, really, this is about this year's annual budget. This is your chance to let Council know what you need and what our sector more broadly needs. Having read the documentation, Active has formed the view that there's quite considerable social cost to this proposed budget, and we feel that our sector is going to be hit quite hard with a number of the initiatives that are proposed. When it comes to the submissions, numbers do count, so it's really important that we do get a large number of submissions so that our voice can be heard. Next slide, please, Emily. Thank you. So by way of background, Council is actually legally required to balance its budget. I'm sure it comes as no surprise to anybody that there is a very significant shortfall in the Council budget at the moment. Council itself is trying to find $55 million of saving with this annual plan. It's probably important to note that that's actually, those numbers are on top of cuts proposed by earlier budgets, which are also quite significant. So it is certainly a very challenging dynamic, and because of the unfortunate timing with the climate events and the recent CRL announcement, those issues aren't actually spoken to directly as part of this budget. So that also has implications for what potentially is proposed and how much the budget blowout is going to get worse rather than better. Next slide, Emily, please. So Council's pulling a number of levers. Obviously, I'll talk through some of the key ones that we feel will affect our sector, but in addition to the cuts, other matters that Council is consulting on is around whether they sell their shares in the Auckland International Airport. That's suggested around $1.9 billion, and that will help to pay down debt, and that means we're paying less interest. There is a proposal to increase rates by about 7%. However, they're also cutting or suspending some of the targeted rates, so that should bring it down to an average rate rise of about 4.66. And they're also continuing to use debt funding. Generally, the debt funding is more in the space of capital investment rather than operational. Next slide, Emily, please. Thank you. So from our reading of the consultation documents, we think our sector is going to be impacted in a number of ways. Firstly, at regional level, there's a couple of grants that are quite important to our sector that will be cut. One's the Regional Sport and Recreation Program grant. That funds a lot of really great initiatives around the place. In cases, John Walker's Find Your Field of Dreams, there's Active's Water Skills for Life, there's Active Asian. So there's a number of really important initiatives that impact underactive members of the community that looking like that grant potentially will be cut. And the other probably significant grant for our sector is it's actually called the Regional Sport and Recreation Facilities Operating Grant, but Council's calling it the Regional Recreation Facilities Operating Grant. This funds a number of our facilities, certainly our larger facilities, and it just helps with some of their operational costs, and some of these are actually legacy grants from the earlier councils. Again, it's looking like that grant is on the chopping block, and it's really important for a number of those facilities. In fact, absolutely critical that that grant is retained. Our suggestion is if it is to go, then it would need to be tiered down over a number of years, not just cut cold. The funding for next year in that grant is being honoured as far as we know, so the facilities will have a year to adjust, but notwithstanding it's of concern. The other major cut is in the local board space. We know local boards have really struggled with their capital funding for a number of years. Unfortunately, we're now moving into the operational side of that as well. That means potentially that field maintenance and mowing, those standards and what can be expected will be, certainly the standards will be dropped. Sports fields are accepted in that. However, it's not clear what the areas around sports fields, how they will be looked after. Local community grants, if your club reaches out to your local board and gets grants each year, it looks like that source of income will be gone. Parks planning, so that's master planning of parks. It looks like that will not be proceeding for many of the local boards. Sport and recreation facility planning, so a number of local boards have actually got plans around their sport and rec facilities. They're not going to be going ahead. And a number of the parks activations, such as Out and About, look like they'll also be cut. Probably important to note, each local board has discretion in how they will need to find the operational funding cuts. So it might be that there will be a little bit of variation across the region, but I think the important thing to remember is that once it's gone, it's gone. Thanks, Emily. Other matters for our sector, which I think people should be a little bit concerned about, is the increase in cost of hireable booking spaces at council-owned facilities. So they are the facilities, council-run facilities is what that should read. So where council's running those facilities, there is quite an increase in cost. So if you are delivering programs out of those out of those sport and rec facilities, it's really important that you understand what the implications may be. And the other one is the community occupancy guidelines. For those that aren't aware of that, that's council's policy framework around how leasing is to work. And there are a couple of quite significant changes that it's important to be aware of. One is the building maintenance fees, where you are leasing or renting a room or a building that council owns. There is a significant shift in the cost of the maintenance that council will now be passing on to the leasee. Currently, for small areas, it's about $250 a year. That's proposed to go to $2,500 next year. And as you have the costs increase depending on the size of your lease area. And the other one, which is quite significant, is rental charges. So as I'm sure most clubs on this call will know, generally you have a $1 a year peppercorn rent, and that isn't generally charged because of the cost of recuperating the dollar is way more expensive than charging for it. That is going to shift to $1,300 a year per annum. So that is quite a significant chunk of money that needs to be found just to pay your rent each year for the ground rents for council to council. The local boards do have some discretion here, but they would need to find the cost somewhere else. So if they choose not to pass those costs directly onto clubs or to absorb those costs, then they will need, that means something else in the budget will need to get cut. So from our reading of the documents, the overwhelming theme that emerges here is that sport and recreation will become increasingly unaffordable. And, you know, I think the implications for our communities that flow on from that are probably pretty obvious and certainly something of a concern. There is no magic funding bucket. I know that's pretty obvious to anyone who's in sport and rec and trying to find funding for anything. So if the council is not going to make these proposed cuts, then they will need to generate income somewhere else. And in short, of course, what that means is larger rates increase. Other cities are also facing this. This is an Auckland only problem, and you may have seen that Wellington and Tauranga in particular are looking potentially at double-digit increases, or certainly consulting on that basis. We think one solution that we would certainly love the sector to give some thought to and support to, if it makes sense, would be a sport and recreation targeted rate. We have a number of targeted rates for water quality and natural environment, and it would seem that that would be a good solution. That would need to be consulted next year as part of the long-term plan, but we would certainly see some value in that. It is used elsewhere in New Zealand and is particularly effective in Northland. I'm happy to leave it there, but please make sure that you do the reading before you make a submission so that you can be comfortable in understanding what council is seeking your feedback on. At the same time, please ensure that as many people as possible from your organisations are making submissions. There are 2 consultation documents. They are both quite long. Make sure that you have read them both. There is a lot of information which you can skip over, but try to get to the key ones. And look, I certainly acknowledge it's not easy. I've had to spend a lot of time trying to get my head around it as well. But it's really important. We need to let the councillors know what's happening in our sector and understand the impacts this budget would have. So we need to stand up and we need to make sure that our voice is heard. That's all from me. Thank you. I'll hand back, Emily.
Just for that, Simon, just a couple
Yep.
of questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to open that up, if you want me to read that.
If you could read them, Ty, that'd be great, mate.
Oh, the first one's from John Montgomery. Are opening hours specifically targeted for cuts for council facilities, e.g. pools?
Good question. Not that I have seen, but certainly in the library and community centre space, that's been signalled. It would be at the discretion of the local board. So I would think there's potentially that would be the case, yes.
Second question is from Auckland Central Volleyball. The targeted rate enacted temporarily or locked in, like with a statute?
That would be for the governing body to decide, but I know in Northland's case, it was initially brought in for a couple of years, and that was to actually fund the renovations for the World Cup for Okara Park. And then once that finished, it was reconsulted, and the community decided that they saw value in keeping the targeted rate and saw that it could be invested into community. So, there's a long way to go on that, but we think that it's potentially an opportunity for our sector to get a level of funding that can keep the OPEX ticking over and hopefully also raise some money that we can invest in capital, because delivery is a key issue for Auckland as well.
Cool. Cheers, Simon. If there are no other questions for Simon at this point, and you think of one later on, feel free to chuck it in the chat and we can come back to it. But next up, we have Harbour Sport General Manager Richard Kasut talking around submissions and what you should be putting in them.
Kia ora tātou, kei te paha o tamatia te monga, ko Waimakariri, te awa, no Atatahi ahau, ko Kasut toku whānau, ko Rihari toku ingoa, kei Harbour Sports, e Mahiana General Manager. So thanks all. I'll try and keep it short and brief. What Simon has done and the Harbour Sport team and a few other people that are experts have helped try and create a very simple template for us to use. And it's really critical that it's not the same template used across all organisations. So, which means making sure you have your own local needs and your local issues inserted into the parts. And the template in front of you is what we're sending out to everyone. Very important that you add your pieces in red. Obviously, an organisational name, what you're about, who you're about, how many people you represent is really important as an organisation. But then if you can get your people to submit explaining some of the issues they face as well, it's a really wise thing for them to do it as well. The more the merrier. When you amass numbers, you definitely create a voice. When you create a voice, you get a chance to have a say. So I can't underemphasize that if you've got a club of 500 people and 500 people submitted, it means something. The key part, though, is actually what effect will these funding cuts have across the board? I want to give some examples, and I suppose we can go with this. You'll have a pretty good idea, but ultimately costs go up. As a club, you'll have to charge more. As an RSO, you'll have to charge more. We already know, all the data tells us when costs go up, that increases the people that participate, it increases it decreases the number of people that participate, increases the stress on organisers, puts pressure on volunteers, reduces the quality of the experience for people. When the experience is reduced, it has another effect of reducing participation. So it's as simple as that. And we're talking when you lose in the volleyball scenario or an indoor facility scenario, funding that the North Shore Events Centre gets indoor stadiums they get for operating costs, they're going to lose 30% of their income from these cuts. So therefore, where are they going to get that? They'll increase their costs of hireage by a minimum of 30%. They also, as organisations, we get community grant funding. We lose that. That helps cover some of those costs. So the facilities that we use go up in cost. The funding we get as a local organisation is lost. Therefore, our fees multiply out. I did a wee play on my local volleyball club. We're lucky we use some school facilities, but when we use council facilities or bigger, wider community facilities, our expected cost of going up 50% on the usage of those facilities. So imagine the 50% increase cost. For a football club or rugby club, if you have to pay for your facilities now, if you haven't worked out already, that $1,300 fee plus a number on your square meterage for the size of your facility. So in some cases, there are clubs with 50 people with 50 square meters. Their costs are the $1,300 plus another $2,500 a year for the use of their facility that is council owned and been on a peppercorn lease. So things to pull the heartstrings in your submission. I've got notes along the lines of less members means less sponsorship opportunity, but also means less local business opportunity. So local businesses that rely on the local club being successful actually go out of business in the local community as well, which means there's less input from them back into the local club. Less members means less people engaged. The bigger picture is increased health issues, increased crime in the local community, more teenage delinquency if we can't occupy the kids in the community in their different backdrops of different suburbs. Could it mean the end of your club? Some of you will be doing the figures. Write it. If you really fear your club could lose altogether because the membership fees will go too much, say it. The fear is with these costs, my club may not exist anymore. Reduction of volunteers, we already know they're critical in the delivery of sport, but if they're not getting the access to services and equipment they need, because of the increased costs, we know the volunteers will disappear. With less volunteers, less people play. It's a snowball effect. Probably the last part is that the social importance of sport. What does it mean to your club? What's the history of your club look like? How long have you been around? How have you grown in the last period of time? What's the effect of COVID been? And now this, on top of the effect of COVID on you, is a story you need to tell, and you need to have a lot of people telling it for you. Without being really clear on what those issues you face are and the threat that this is creating for you, and being really upfront about it, the message may not get across. It is a big concern. I kid you not, the costs are great. And it's just the start, probably. So even though this is a budget for this period, once it starts, it only gets bigger. And so we need to work really hard over the next 6 days and get our submissions in. Think of that from your point of view. Put your family, that's the poorest family in your club or families in your club, are they going to be able to afford a 30 to 50% increase in fees for your club? Is your club going to handle not getting the council funding that you've previously got? With a sinking lid policy on all the other funding as well, and the grant funding, more people are going to apply for that. So therefore, does that mean there's less in the pot for people to access? So it's a bit of a snowball across the board with funding. So make sure you submit, make sure you're clear on the long-term effect of your club and your RSOs, and make sure you talk about the grandkids aren't going to be being able to play sport anymore. It's just going to be the select few and the select few that can afford to play. Thank you.
Awesome, yes, Suri. If you have any questions for Richard, feel free to pop that into the chat function. Just checking now. Simon, you're good to answer those questions in the chat?
Yeah, doing my best, Ty. I'm not an expert. A lot of these probably need to be addressed directly to council.
Okay, cool. Mike, we can, if you want to flick us an email offline and we can direct you to the answer for that question. Cool, so my part is next. We're just going to look into how we would go about making a submission. If I can find the... Awesome. Can we see that? Sweet. So rather than going through the Auckland Council website, you can just simply type in Auckland Council annual budget quotation. Cool. It's the top one there. Your budget 2023, 2024. Okay, have your say as what you want to go to. Cool. Awesome. So then you want to go to have your say now. Please note that you have 6 days from today to make your submission. You'll get taken through to a portal. The first part is around context / setting the scene. There are then 6 questions that you'll need to ask. First one's around operating spending reductions. Second one's around selling of the airport sharehold. Third part's around debts and rates. Fourth part's storm response. Question 5, so this one's obviously really important. You want to tick the local board that concerns you, either where you live or what affects your organisation or anything outside of life. And then down the bottom, what else is important to you? Or is there anything, do you have feedback on any other issues, or is there anything else that you would like to give feedback on? And here we have choose file. This is where you want to submit your document that you have made or your organisation have made. Essentially what Richard was talking about before. You want to make sure you get that in there. Obviously ask the questions beforehand, but this is your opportunity to tell your story or tell your organisation's story. So you just click through there, choose your file, and then you find the one you want to submit. Wait, Em, do you want to share the thing, please? Cool. If you still have any questions, feel free to put them through. Just on this slide here, take note of the key contact that's within your area. So I have myself from Harbour Sport, we have Bernie from CLM, Antoinette from Sport Waitakere, we have Sam from Sport Auckland, and Simon from Active. Take note of these email addresses. We're here to help.